Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to do another expert spotlight interview. I am really pumped to actually have a chat with a good friend and somebody who's done such incredible stuff to help me get my brand out there. Esther, first of all, I have to show massive appreciation to you because of what you've been able to help me with, and I have to thank you for everything before we even get started. But the way that all of you guys know how these interviews work is I find people who crush it and can do something very, very, very well, and we dive really deep into that particular thing, into that particular topic. And this one is extremely important because not a lot of people understand how best to leverage publicity and relations, and how best to leverage relationships to grow their audience and to get their message out there and to really make a big impact on their business, but also on their marketplace and whatnot. And Esther is a genius and incredible at this. And I'm so excited to really dive into this because it's also a world that I don't know much about. I don't come from that background. I'm strictly numbers and digital marketing, and so it's going to be very fascinating diving into that. And Esther, if you don't mind sharing with everybody a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, this is your chance to please don't be humble. I know you typically are, but brag, show people the incredible kind of results and who you've worked with, and tell them about your journey about PR. And then what we're going to move into is, let's talk about it in a step-by-step format. If I'm starting from nothing and I know I'm an expert in something and I know I can give people results, how do I get my message out there? We're going to break that down step by step. What do I do? What should I be thinking about? Sound good?
Good. Thank you so much for having me here, Mikkel, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. Well, just to give you guys a little bit of a background, I've been in business and business development and marketing for about 18 years, and you will hear a little bit of an accent, so pay attention properly. I'm originally from Hungary, and I lived in 6 other countries before I moved to California. So I think I have a little bit of a mix of all kinds of different accents here.
Perfect.
But because of the travels and because of having experienced so many different cultures, I think that really helped me with picking up skill sets on connecting with people. And that's something that is so important when you're looking to do publicity, because it's all about relationships. It's about finding out what is it that would really help that other person, that journalist, that TV producer, that podcaster, whoever it may be, what would help their audience. And it comes down to having a level of empathy for your ideal client as well, and understanding what kind of message would help move their story forward. So just to give you a little bit of a background with how I started doing this business, publicity services, about 4.5, maybe 5 years ago, I really wanted to work with higher level entrepreneurs. So people who have built multi-million-dollar businesses, people who wrote New York Times best-selling books, but I didn't know what the offer would be. I knew marketing, but I didn't know anything really about publicity, and that was not even on my radar. But I teamed up with a really good friend of mine, Meta Miller, and we started a podcast because the whole idea was that we would give these influencers a platform so that they can share their message in a bigger way and talk about their books or coaching programs or events that they have coming up. If we give them a platform, we will help them and contribute to them. And so that was the plan. No big business, no what will be the offer or anything like that. Every time we would do an interview, at the end I would ask this person that, hey, I know you have this book coming out or you have this program that you're launching. Would you like to be on other shows as well? And they would always say yes. So I started introducing them and connecting them with other podcasters, getting them on TV and everything, and just to help them, to invest in the relationship. And then one of my clients came to me and he said that, hey, I have this guy who is a client of mine and he's a best-selling author. Can you help him get on some shows? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And he was like, yeah, but this time you have to charge for it. So I was like, okay, fine.
All right, well, if you insist. I will.
And so, the podcast organically evolved into this, where now we've been able to work with some of the biggest names in our industry, including people like Ryan Levesque for his book launch for Ask, Gary Vaynerchuk, like really, really big names, as well as a lot of up-and-coming influencers. And one thing that I learned from this experience, and what we've been doing with you as well, Mikhail, with all of my clients, is looking at the business very holistically, looking at the person who is sharing a message, exactly what kind of stories they should be sharing on those interviews so that those interviews will convert. And once the interviews get published, not just look at, okay, let's get all this exposure, but how do we combine it with what you already got going on with your existing sales and marketing funnels? So using retargeting, for example, including it in your email newsletters, in your autoresponders, in your social media posts, like all those things, looking at it very holistically so that you really bring it full circle and don't leave any opportunities on the table.
Nice. And something you just mentioned that is interesting. There's a weird echo.
Didn't do anything.
No, I don't know. I can hear myself, which is strange. Oh, now it's kind of gone. So something that you and I did at the very beginning of the process was really diving deep into stories and into dissecting my stories and really taking that and trying to mold that so that when you do approach influencers and when you do approach people, you can leverage that. Is that where you start with everybody? Is that really the core, the essence of publicity is just sharing your story to the world? Or is there more to it? How do you normally start with somebody? What's the process?
So it evolved over time. Initially, if somebody came to me who was already an experienced speaker, or if they've done a lot of interviews on their own, or they've had maybe somebody else who they work with, I felt like, well, they are good to go. They know how to present their message. But I started seeing that there is this variance between how well those interviews actually work for them in terms of getting more leads and sales in their business. And I thought that, well, maybe I can help them a little bit, especially with speakers, because there is this format, that we are used to when you're speaking on stages, that you tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them the 5 talking points, and then you tell them what you told them, basically how you would teach a webinar as well, right? That works in a sales presentation type of format. Or if you're traveling the country, going from stage to stage, the audience is not going to be following you from one physical location to the other. So you can sort of redo the same presentation over and over again, and it will be good. But it really doesn't translate that well to the interview format. So for example, here we have a back and forth. You're asking me questions. I know what I need to share with everybody here so that they get the most value out of it, but still it needs to be fitting with what you're looking to have here for the flow of the interview so that it works well with what you established here in the group with a series of interviews as well. So I realized that I need to help my clients with that, because sometimes they're just not aware that it's not a presentation, it's a conversation. I mean, it sounds logical, right, when you think about it, but when they're thinking that, oh, I got my book, I have to go on this podcast tour or on this media tour to promote it everywhere, they're not thinking necessarily from the perspective of how can I help this audience, and it's really, really critical. So now we do that with every single client. We start with dialing in the messaging, and the fundamental questions that we ask here is, who is your ideal target client? What do they need to hear and believe in order to want to take the next step with you, whether it's trying out the software or joining a Facebook group or coming to the webinar, downloading the cheat sheet, whatever that offer is, right? And then we identify the specific stories and examples and case studies that would fit that format, that would go well to answer those questions in your audience's head, and that also fits the media format. Because, for example, a podcast interview might be 20 minutes or an hour. It's really long, and you have a lot of time to go into your story and explain your methodology. That's very different than having a minute and a half on TV, or having a 5-point bullet point article in Forbes magazine or something like that, the how-to kind of step-by-step. So we need to make sure that whatever your message is, it also, you know how to translate it and how to share it depending on what type of media we are going after.
Okay, so I now know my story, or stories, because I remember when you and I did the exercise, you really made me think about the journey and think about multiple stories. And it's not just about what the end result that I want to share with people. It's really is about building that empathy, getting people, attracted to you as a character, as a person, creating that dynamicness that makes you relatable and makes you actually, you're not just this random person who's on this podcast being interviewed, but you're actually a real human being, and you've gone through ups and downs and whatnot. You've gone through a journey. So dialing in those stories, dialing in those experiences was the very first thing that you and I did when we were working together. And afterwards now, what happens, because you do a whole bunch of stuff behind the scenes, but let's say I wanted to do this for myself, right? I want to get featured in Forbes, or I want to go on the Entrepreneur on Fire podcast, or I have these goals. I want to kind of put myself out there, but I don't know how. How do I do it? What's next? Okay, I know my stories. I know what I'm going to share with people. I kind of know who I want to speak to. Now what?
Okay, good question. So the first thing that everybody hates to hear is it's about relationships. It really is about connecting with people and making friends with them before you would pitch yourself. Now, if you have a launch coming up in the next 2 or 3 months, you kind of want to focus on that because you feel like, it needs to come out before your product actually launches. And I can understand that. But if you can just maybe think a little bit back time-wise, have more lead time, and start connecting with people on social media, once you start pitching, your response rate and your feedback will be so much better because they already know, like, and trust you. So the first thing would be really to start connecting with them on social. Now, if you're going after traditional media like TV and radio, it's not as important. It's still good, if you have a good working relationship with a news director or a producer or something like that, it's good that they will actually look out for your emails or call you back. But there, it's much more important that your expertise ties in with a mainstream news story that the media is already interested in. Like, for example, with you, Mikkel, we pitched you for Father's Day. We had some interest. They ended up not booking the show, but that's kind of the nature of the game. It needs to be with something that they're already talking about anyway, right?
Yep.
So there, it's not as much about, hey, I like you, I want to have you in front of my audiences, because it's much more news-based. For something like Forbes magazine or a podcast, it's much more evergreen. They would typically be looking for a how-to type of article or a how-to type of interview that will help with tangible advice. It will really contribute to their audience, where you can give them the 3-step, this is what you do to accomplish X result. So if you can pitch that well, that's where you start seeing good feedback, where people actually want to interview you. So for example, if let's say you don't know the person at all, but you reach out to them and you would say that, hey, what inspired you to start this show? Or what inspired you to start writing for Forbes magazine? Just start having a little conversation with them. What kind of stories are you working on? What would really be helpful for your audience? Get their take on what they're looking for. And if you have something that would contribute to that, that's the time to pitch it. Now, a good format for this might be something like you email them or you Facebook message them once you've had a little bit of a back and forth and say that, hey, I really enjoyed this specific episode, and point to one or an article because, and then give them a reason why. And immediately you establish rapport with them. So you will not just give them a compliment for compliment's sake, but you're actually saying that, hey, this blog post that you wrote here or this article that you posted here really resonated with me because, and tell them how it actually impacted you. That requires a little bit of research, knowing what they're about, right? But that also helps you position your pitch in a way that will actually help their audience. And then you would go into what you're pitching them, that, hey, I think that your audience would really benefit from interviewing me, or doing an interview or having an article about these topics, and then do a bullet point of 2 or 3 different things that you're able to speak to, and write those bullet points in terms of headlines. Put your copywriter hat on and think about what would cause a person to click, to want to listen to that show or want to read that article. And if you can do it in a way where they see that you understand the marketing angle of their game as well, it will be easier to get built because it's not just about the content, it's about actually getting eyeballs on it, right?
Nice.
So you want to do it that way, and then say that, well, let me know what you think, and then see what they think, and then you can go and book it in from there.
I like what you just explained, because I think it's important that people realize that connecting with humans, that's all this is really. It's just connecting with another human being, and it's actually being genuinely interested in their show and not just trying to look out for yourself and be like, I want to be on all of these shows, so let me just try and pitch my way in. No, you actually have to be genuinely interested in the stuff that they put out and see that there's a relation and there's a correlation between what you want to say versus what they already talk to their audience about. And that's how you build that relationship. That's how you really start that conversation, is by commenting and talking about the stuff that they already talk about, as opposed to talking about yourself.
Yeah. And
do you find a lot of people? Go ahead.
Well, sometimes you do it in 2 steps. Like, for example, we had you do an interview on the Social Pros podcast, Jay Baer's podcast. Now, Jay Baer is a multiple New York Times bestselling author, and typically the companies that he features on his podcast, the brands that he features are Fortune 500 companies, because it's all about how to use social media, quote unquote, properly, right, to actually connect and develop the human connection, exactly what you're talking about. Now, I've known Jay for a number of years, actually, because we had him on my show. I interviewed him a while back. And so I just did this little 2-step pitch where I first messaged him on Facebook, and I said that, hey, I have somebody that I think would be a really good fit. Not a Fortune 500 company, but here is the gist. And I just gave him a little bit of a story of your pre-launch, how you did it for Funalytics with the initial Facebook group that, when it was back in the fall last year. And he's like, yeah, I would be interested. Email me more information. And then I sent him all the details. Once I had the buy-in from him, he wanted to know more. So sometimes you break it up depending on how popular the show is and how closely you really can fit it in. If you really think that it would be good for that audience, but in this case, for example, it's not a Fortune 500 company, but we know it would be a good fit, you can still make it work as long as you prioritize and respect the person's relationship with their audience.
Right. And is there a difference between how you approach things from I know TV is kind of a separate beast in its own thing, but is there a difference between how you approach being featured on Forbes or on Inc. versus high-end podcasts? Like, say I wanted to be featured on the Tim Ferriss show versus Forbes. Is it both just about understanding and knowing who is the editor that you can build a relationship in Forbes versus like knowing Tim Ferriss? Is that the gist, or like is there a different approach that you would take?
Well, with someone like Tim, it's if you have a biohacking angle, that's probably going to get his attention, right?
Sure.
But you would want to do something that will also help with someone like him, because he's so into the online marketer space. If you have a lot of mutual friends, getting an introduction, for example, would really, really help, right? Or referring to something that he's done with someone who you both know. That would be absolutely helpful. With something like a Forbes editor, or if sometimes you can pitch the writers directly who have a level of control over what they write about, you can just build a relationship over time and then say that, hey, I have this topic. I think it would be really helpful for your column. It would be good for your audience. And then again, give them a few options. You would give specific how-to type of topics. Now, if you're a person like, for instance, Tim Ferriss, somebody who already has a huge online following, a magazine like Forbes or Inc. or Entrepreneur might be interested in writing about you as the person, right? The human interest story, the story of the entrepreneur. Most likely, until you build up to that level of fame, they will want to do more how-to type of articles. Give me the 5 steps to accomplishing X. That's typically what the editor would approve, unless they already see you as a quote-unquote famous person. For a podcast, very often they want to know your story as well. So there, you would, as a guest, you would want to pay attention to giving it a good balance, because the listeners they will be drawn into your story. But in order to take the next step with you, to opt into your list, to come to your webinar, to download your freebie, they will need to have something that they feel like you really truly helped them. So no matter what the person is asking you, who's interviewing you, you'll always want to have a good balance of giving them a story, and then giving them an example that will give them a how-to as well.
Okay, so now we've created and we have a list of all of our stories. We know who we are, our journey, we know who we want to target, and we started building some connections, some relationships with potential people that we're going to get featured on and whatnot. What's next? What happens now?
Now comes the follow-up. This is what a lot of people kind of forget about as well, or they feel like, I don't want to be a pest. If they will want to have me on the show, they will just respond. And I mean, if that happened, that would be amazing. But that's like a 0.1% of the situations. Maybe even for me, I've been doing it for years, and I still have to follow up with people. Even if you track your emails and you see that they've opened it or the Facebook message, doesn't mean that they read it. Who knows what's going on, right? So you want to make sure that you seed your content in your initial pitch so that you can give them additional information when you follow up, right? So for example, if it was for a newspaper or a magazine, you might say that, hey, I was just interviewed on this topic on this podcast, or I just did this TV interview on the same topic, or here's some B-roll that we could include, for instance, for TV, so that they can cut away to something. They don't want just to have a talking heads kind of thing. So you would think about it ahead of time. How do you position that pitch? What will be the follow-up that you can reach out to that is more than, hey, what do you think, right? Yeah. It's that you're giving them additional information and make it more urgent so that they will actually want to say yes. And don't worry about following up multiple times. Like, don't hammer them every day, but once a week, or once every 3-4 days, depending on your relationship with them, you'll want to actually give them a nudge, and then they will either say yes or no. Right? If you don't have any relationship with them, and they might ignore it completely, and that's why we want to start with building relationships first.
Okay, so let's assume somebody says yes.
Okay.
They've said yes. Now you're going to be interviewed. Do people, even me right now, I've been on 20 podcasts or so in the last like 3 months, or 25. I don't know.
I know. I counted it. I think it was over 30, if I remember.
Over 30. Oh man.
At least one's been booked in. There's some will be still recorded. Yeah.
It's been a lot of podcasts. I did 2 today actually, before earlier today. But the a lot of times, for me, I think with Funnelytics, it's pretty natural to kind of, because people want to know about Funnelytics. They're curious, right? So they instantly ask questions about it. They instantly want to know, how we built it and all of this stuff. But if you're an expert and you're not necessarily building a cool software, how do you steer these conversations? What should people be thinking about during your podcast interviews, during when they get featured on Forbes, or what should they want versus what should they not want?
Okay, so what the guest, what they should want and not want, or the audience?
The guest, the person, like, I'm the expert, I'm now about to go, what should I want the outcome of the interview to be versus what should I try to stay away from? Okay,
got you. So this is why we start as the first step with identifying your intentional media message content, your IMMC, which is what we did with your stories and examples and case studies, because it goes back to understanding what is the conversation in your ideal target client's head, right? So let's say, for example, you guys have the company for understanding your macros, right, with IFYM.
Yeah.
Well, I know nothing about that stuff, but I just know that if I want to lose weight, or if I want to have more energy or something like that, those are the questions in my head, not how to balance all the different ingredients on my plate for every single meal. So
Sure.
For example, if you were to do an interview for that company, then you would talk more to the level of questions that I have in my head as a potential client or somebody who might want to try one of those products, based on, okay, most people think that having more energy has to do with exercising more, but actually the nutrients are so much more important. And if you don't have them balanced, you would just talk to me like I'm from Mars, like I know nothing about it, right? Going back to what was it like when you first discovered this methodology? You were not always an expert, right? There was something where you had an aha moment where you started learning and it became interesting to you, because all those discoveries unfolded in a way that got you in this path to want to learn more and ultimately become an expert. So try to get yourself back to that headspace rather than talking in a very sophisticated language and from an ego perspective of, look at me, who I am, look, I'm this very cool expert and I can talk about really advanced strategies. That's great for masterminds or if you have a high level event. But for interviews, try to take it down a notch and talk to the most common denominator. You know, the questions that a person would have who's never heard about you, right? Or never heard about this kind of a methodology. Those are the people who you would want to attract, to cast a wide net. And then the more sophisticated ones, they will come because they see that you know what you're talking about. So
Right.
That way you get as many people in your network as possible.
Okay, and then on the flip side, what mistakes do you see often when it comes to podcast interviews, when it comes to trying to get featured and, you know, even if especially if I've already been invited as a guest, when you listen to podcasts, do you kind of judge the podcast and be like, you know, they didn't really go the right route there, or do you have that analytical mind when you're listening to podcasts?
Yeah. I can kind of tell if it will work for the person or not, assuming that they keep it up in all the shows that they do, like that level of performance. Well, one is rapport. It's so important because you want to have a good back and forth with your host rather than being very dry and educational. If you think about it, that podcast listeners typically listen to that show, they tune in every day or every week or however often that comes out. They trust that host. Now, if that host has a good rapport with you, then that relationship will transfer to you as well. That trust will transfer to you. But if you're being a little standoffish or very guarded or just like answering the questions, like they ask something and then you answer and you don't take the conversation forward, it's more like a, you know, when they, what do you call it? When you sit in the police and they ask you all the questions.
An interrogation, yeah.
You don't want it to be like that. You want to be a little bit entertaining and trying to really connect on a heart level, energetically with that person. Just hold the safe space for them, because you wouldn't believe how many podcasters, they're the host, but they're still nervous, especially if you have a good track record, if you're a successful entrepreneur and they're thinking that, ooh, maybe I'm a little bit shy, I'm looking up to this person and putting them on a pedestal. They may not be as free with you as they would with a friend. So you want to make sure that their guards are down. And the best thing to do with that is have a little bit of fun with them and really joke around just a little bit so that they feel good and comfortable with asking the real questions.
Okay. Have you found that there are specific pitches, not pitches, but, you know, call to actions? Because of course, everybody, you know, I'm not so sure on the editorial side, but at least on podcasts, when you're being interviewed on podcasts, there's typically always, you know, at the end, like, how can they find out more info about you? And have you found that there's specific things that people should be thinking about promoting? Is it giving a freebie, like a free report, or is it just sending people to more information? What typically works on podcasts?
Well, I would start with whatever already works well in your business. So for example, if you've been running Facebook ads to a particular freebie and it converted well, likely it will work well for interviews as well. But with that, I want to add to it that it should be something that is really easy to consume. So for instance, if it's a podcast interview that was an hour long or even 20 minutes, you don't want to send them to a webinar unless it's really performing exceptionally well.
Right. Because
the person just invested 20 minutes of their time. They're not going to want to sit on another hour thing unless they're totally in love with you, right? So have something like a downloadable cheat sheet or a little video series, or join your Facebook group, or something that feels like it's not a big deal to do. And make sure that the URL that you're giving out is something that is very easy to remember, because most people will listen to a show while they're, you know, walking the dog or they're on the treadmill or whatever they're doing. They're not necessarily memorizing it. So the easier you can make it, the better off you will be, the better your conversions. And then one other thing to remember with this is to make it so that the topics of the interview, you talked about it, reverse engineering what you're going to talk about based on what your audience needs. It also needs to seed your offer. So for example, in this case, when we are doing this interview here, we are talking about what does it take to have a good publicity campaign. Like, how do you pitch? Like, what do you need to have in place so that members of the media actually want to interview you? How to build the relationships. Those are things that I have additional trainings around, or additional free information that I can point people to, so that at the end, when they do ask you that question, and how can people find more about you, you can say that, yeah, and actually what we talked about, there was just a whole lot more that we didn't have time to go into detail. Go here to get it.
So is it really that easy? I mean, it seems that people are like, you look at people who are featured on Forbes and who are featured in these magazines, or who are podcast interviews, and you kind of look at them and instantly their credibility skyrockets. But is it really that easy to kind of just be featured? Like, it's know your stories, build a relationship, build rapport on the actual interview, and bravo.
Okay, so I want to say yes, but I'm also aware that I've been doing it for a few years. I will say that the devil is in the details. It's kind of like if you would say that, is it that easy to build a funnel? Well, yeah, we can all go and build a landing.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair.
But how well it will convert depends on how good your message is to that audience, and what kind of quality of traffic you have there, right? So just to give you a little bit of an idea what you might expect from a tour when you start getting publicity. Well, one thing you touched on is credibility. That's huge, because people, when they see those logos in your website, that as seen on ABC, NBC, Entrepreneur Magazine, Forbes, it really helps them trust you, because they automatically assume that, well, this guy must know what they're talking about.
Yep.
Ryan Levesque, who we were talking about earlier, right? His book launch I worked on. Well, he mentioned to me, like years before I even worked with him, that because he had all those TV logos from his prior TV interviews, one of his clients came to him and he said that, hey, she said that I signed up with you because I saw those TV logos there. And that's, most people are not even aware. They're not that conscious of why they're making a buying decision. It's just sort of impacting you on a subconscious level. In this particular case, that lady ended up spending over $60,000 with him. And so that's really serious. Even if that was the only client that ever came from his TV interviews, it was already worth it, right?
Yeah.
But if you think about it with him specifically, because he has a similar product to yours, a software product that is for business owners, similar target market, we worked on getting him a lot of podcasts, and that was so effective for him. We literally ended up adding over $1.8 million per year to his business, using a combination of doing podcast interviews with a free plus shipping book giveaway, and then upselling them into the continuity program that came with the software. And it worked really, really well for him. So for most people in this group, what I would venture to say is podcasts will be something that you definitely want to look at as far as a way of generating leads and sales. And then for the credibility piece, certainly the bigger shows, bigger podcasts, and then also some of the big business publications like Forbes and Inc. and Entrepreneur, and maybe even some TV.
Okay. And what are we missing here? What's because it's so funny when I think about, you mentioned funnels, and you mention how, like you set up a landing page, but like, yes, it's in the details, and then you have to think about the conversions, and then what you have to optimize, and all of these things.
Yeah, load times and everything that I know nothing of.
Yeah, but I mean, it seems, or it feels as though, like, why isn't everybody on publications? Why isn't everybody on podcasts? Like, I don't know if it's that easy. It's one of those things, right? And again, being quite naive and not understanding how PR works, other than me being on these interviews all the time. It's like somebody coming to me and saying, well, if it was that easy to convert $1 into $3 on ads, everybody would be doing it. Yeah. So why isn't? What's the hard part about this? Like, if I want to do this by myself, what is the roadblock that stops people from actually making it happen?
I think two things. One is either because they are very much in the direct response mindset, of only thinking very analytically, that I put in $1, $3 comes out, and you can correlate it you can really correlate it very specifically when you're doing ads and you track everything properly. With publicity, you can see that to a certain extent. Like if you gave coupon code and those buyers came in, but also it will have an effect down the line. Like for instance, if you're on a TV show, that will make a difference forever because you have that logo there that actually impacts your conversions, because people always see that this is the kind of person who was trusted by super big brands. It doesn't necessarily comes from that one interview, but it will impact the overall perception of your brand. So I would say that if somebody is very much in the direct response mindset, that might be a roadblock for them. But consider Dan Kennedy. Like, he is super direct response, and yet he has some kind of social media presence. They run a lot of things where they combine it with publicity. What's her name? Kim Walsh-Phillips is doing his social media stuff, and so a lot of it is all about building trust with his audience. And part of why he's writing books all the time, right, is because he understands that he needs to develop a relationship with new audiences. That's a way of building that too, right? Now you don't have to write a book though. That's a good thing. You can just go and do interviews. It's way easier, in my view.
I agree.
I think that the other roadblock might be is a lot of times people feel like they're not good enough. You know, there is that imposter syndrome that, who am I to do this? Why should people listen to me? And that comes up all the time, even with people who have built multi-million-dollar businesses. There's still that stupid little thing that I'm kind of like winging it, and who am I to do this?
a lot of times people don't realize how, like, you built a 7-figure business. You're like, I just did it. I don't know. It just happened. And it's like, I'm not an expert. I just did it once. A lot of times that happens for sure.
Yeah.
So you notice that people have a lot of imposter syndrome. Yeah.
I actually just did a live stream on this the other day because I had this myself. I was going through this type of thinking just the other day. I'm like, I wonder what happened if I actually learned publicity properly. If I actually applied myself.
It's like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I just have these connections and these relationships, and it seems to work.
Magic.
It just happens.
There is a method to the madness, but it's hard to recognize it in ourselves. And I think that can be a little bit of a roadblock for someone to be really brave and put themselves out there intentionally when they go on a publicity tour.
So let me ask you on that note, how do you overcome it? How do you believe in yourself enough that actually, I should share my story?
I think the biggest thing with that is understanding that it's not about you. If you're going there with an ego perspective, I want to make money, I want to be famous, it's going to have a really bad energy, and your response rate doesn't matter what your accomplishments are. People wanting to have you on their show, they might have you on, but it's like, oh, I interviewed that asshole there. So,
please. I swear all the time.
You're not gonna be receiving word of mouth between media contacts if you're going with the bad intentions. But if you put the emphasis on the audience and truly wanting to help them, and not customizing all of your media pitches based on what that specific audience would benefit from, now you're not thinking about, oh my God, how do I look? Am I good enough on camera? I don't like the sound of my voice. Like, all that stuff just goes away because you're focused on the content and wanting to help. So basically what it comes down to is to lead with the spirit of generosity and giving and wanting to help that other person, and it will come back to you tenfold. Nice.
Okay, so I need to ask you then, how can people get more help with this? Because it sounds easy, but it's, there's definitely nuances, and I know I would have never been able to do this without you. And I think people need to understand how can they move forward, because a lot of people do want to be featured. A lot of people do want to be interviewed. A lot of people have incredible stories and have accomplished really great stuff and can provide a lot of value to audiences, but they just don't really know where to start. And we've given them a bit of a structure here, but how can they get more?
Sure. So, well, you're welcome to contact me anytime. Just reach out on Facebook. And I also have a lot of free trainings in our Facebook group, the Born to Influence community. So you can just come and reach in there, join us there, because I have a lot of, actual course type content that I'm giving away inside the group that is completely for free. And you can learn a lot from there and ask me questions as well. The name of the group is Born to Influence Community. Or otherwise, just, reach out and then we see what would be the best fit for you. If you want us to help and implement it for you, or take one of our home study courses, that's an option as well.
Perfect. And I don't know. I see we have we've had a bit of internet issues. I don't know if we have any comments or viewers. Just see a few viewers right now. But if you have any questions, let us know. But Esther, first and foremost, again, myself, I want to thank you for everything. We're only just getting started, but either way, it's been an exciting 3 months, just you and I working together, and just seeing your process and seeing how professional you are and how on top of everything you are is very refreshing. And I thank you very much for being on and sharing all of these details and sharing this step-by-step formula to the audience. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed that, and I can't wait to see how it all unfolds. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll share this to our list, and everybody start working towards getting your message out there. Contact Esther, join her group. It is awesome. So again, thanks so much, Esther. And yeah, we'll chat very soon.